The sight of the boy stirred something deep within Joe. He stood there, unable to move, as emotions he had long pushed down began to rise.
As Joe stared at the photograph, the memories of Nagasaki flooded back, vivid and painful. It was 1945. He had been sent there by the US military to document the aftermath of the bombing. He closed the trunk, but the image of the boy stayed with him, as it always had. Hello friends, welcome back to Info Channel. Today we will discuss a real story of a photographer and a boy, which is very emotional and famous story. Okay, let's begin this. In 1989, JoeODonnell was at the Sisters of Loretto Convent in Nerinx, Kentucky, seeking peace. His long battle with mental health had brought him there, hoping the quiet of the convent would reduce the heavy and sad memories he carried from his past life as a photographer. He had witnessed too much pain through his camera, and the memories clung to him like shadows.
One evening, during a walk through the convent, Joe discovered a small room filled with artwork and old objects. One sculpture stood out, a simple but powerful piece of a young boy which is of a depiction from World War II. A nun had created it as a tribute to the victims of atomic bombs. The sight of the boy stirred something deep within Joe. He stood there, unable to move, as emotions he had long pushed down began to rise.
The sculpture reminded him of a photograph he had taken long ago, one he hadn't thought about in years. Joe rushed back to the room, where he kept his old trunk, a worn chest that had traveled with him through the years. Inside the trunk were memories of his past, old film rolls, faded journals, and the photos he had taken during his career. His hands shook as he searched through them. Then he found it. The photograph of the boy standing by the crematory.
The photo showed a young boy, not even 10 years old, standing still and expressionless. His dead brother was tied to his back with rough cloth. Behind the boy, black smoke rose from a crematory where many bodies were being burned, victims of the atomic bomb that had destroyed Nagasaki. It is widely spread news that a soldier nearby notices boy and asks him to drop the dead child, so that he does not get tired. Boy replied, "He is not heavy, he is my brother." Soldier realized his mistake and broken into tears. Joe had taken this picture himself, standing just a few feet away from the boy. Joe's explanation on complete scene in his own words. I saw a boy about 10 years old walking by. He was carrying a baby on his back. In those days in Japan, we often saw children playing with their little brothers or sisters on their backs, but this boy was clearly different. I could see that he had come to this place for a serious reason. He was wearing no shoes. His face was hard. The little head was tipped back as if the baby were fast asleep. The boy stood there for 5 or 10 minutes. The men in white masks walked over to him and quietly began to take off the rope that was holding the baby. That is when I saw that the baby was already dead. The men held the body by the hands and feet and placed it on the fire. The boy stood there straight without moving, watching the flames. He was biting his lower lip so hard that it shone with blood. The flame burned low like the sun going down. The boy turned around and walked silently away. That moment had burned itself into Joe's memory. But over time, he had managed to forget it until now.
As Joe stared at the photograph, the memories of Nagasaki flooded back, vivid and painful. It was 1945. He had been sent there by the US military to document the aftermath of the bombing. The air smelled of death, the city reduced to ash and ruin. Survivors wandered like ghosts, their skin burned and peeling, their eyes empty. And then there was the boy who stood silently, carrying his dead brother, his face showing no emotion. Joe had wanted to speak to him, to offer some comfort, but the enormity of the moment had overwhelmed him. All he could do was take the picture, capturing the boy's silent suffering.
Sitting in the quiet room in Kentucky, tears filled Joe's eyes. He had seen too much. Nagasaki had broken something inside him, and though decades had passed, the scars had never healed. His thoughts drifted to his wife, who had been his rock during his darkest days. She had been there when he returned from Japan. He had told her about the boy, how that single moment had haunted him more than anything else. She had seen the toll it took on him, the way he would wake up in the night, drenched in sweat, unable to escape the visions of destruction in his dreams.
Sitting in that quiet convent, holding the photograph of the boy standing by the crematory, Joe thought about the senselessness of war. War doesn't build, it only destroys. Cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, children forced to carry their dead siblings. It was all for nothing. War leaves scars, not just on the land, but in the hearts of those who survive. As Joe sat there, he felt the weight of his memories. He closed the trunk, but the image of the boy stayed with him, as it always had. It was a reminder, a message to the world, that war, in all its forms, leaves only destruction behind. And in that moment, Joe knew that even though he couldn't save that boy or undo the horrors of Nagasaki, his photographs could still tell the story. They could still serve as a warning to future generations. War doesn't create, it only destroys. Later in the years, when the photograph became viral, many people tried to find out who is that boy and what happened to him and his remaining family members. But no one got to closer findings about him.
Years later, Joe's wife had spoken about his decline. He never really left Nagasaki. Even after we came home, part of him stayed there, with the ruins and the people. She mentioned that he underwent over 50 operations, including procedures on his colon and heart, and attributed his declining health to radiation exposure from his visits to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It had weakened him, draining his health year after year, until it finally took his life.
In his final days, Joe had told his wife that he didn't regret going to Nagasaki. People need to see, they need to understand what war does. What I saw, what that boy lived through, it should never happen again.
Joe's death was slow and painful, as cancer ate away him, just as the memories had for years. But even as his body weakened, his belief in the power of his photographs remained strong. He knew that through his images, people might see the true face of war, not the heroic battles or victories, but the endless suffering, the loss of innocence, the waste of life.
This is the story of a Joe, a photographer by profession, and a boy's story who is known as the Standing Boy of Nagasaki. Friends, if you like this story, please like, share and subscribe our info channel.